and good afternoon from a very nice winter day in Delhi. And a warm welcome to Professor Christian Bergqvist. This is the fourth session of a webinar series on artificial intelligence, markets, and competition. And while we were doing this series, markets are changing. So we can imagine how tough it is to keep tabs on the developments of the markets, but certain core and fundamental principles and fundamental problems of competition law still remain even in this new technology. And that is what Professor Bergqvist speaks today. He speaks on emerging challenges of AI collusion in competition law. We were talking about algorithmic collusion all this while, but now there is a new element to it, that is a machine-driven, machine-learned collusive practices or a possibility of the same where there's no human intervention. So just a brief introduction to this webinar series, the fourth webinar. And we have really overwhelmed with the kind of response we have got from participants who are interested in this topic. This webinar is organized by the ICRIER Process Center for Internet and Digital Economy. And the center has recently released a report on AI, markets, and competition, in which we are also looked at this aspect very briefly. And so therefore, we thought it would be nice to get expert views. Just an introduction to today's speaker. Professor Christian Bergqvist is an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen's Faculty of Law and senior fellow at the GW Competition and Innovation Lab at the George Washington University. He specializes in EU competition law with particular interest in its application for deregulated and networked sectors such as telecoms and other utilities, and abuse of dominance in those sectors. He has extensive experience in competition law as an academic and has also been a practitioner, being a full-time lawyer in a tier 1 law firm, representing clients before the judicial and administrative bodies on competition law matters. Just to contextualize this talk, as we know, AI is transforming businesses and business operations. It has also given rise to certain new competition challenges and new issues, but certain, as I said, old wine in new bottles, perhaps. And algorithmic collusion and AI-driven algorithmic collusion seems to be one. It's the new dimension is that this algorithmic coordination may occur even in the absence of a formal agreement, even in the absence of a human intervention, as AI systems can autonomously learn to maximize profits, create scenarios in which collusion emerges through parallel actions of multiple AI-driven entities. The economist collusion model talks about an agreement, monitoring, cheating, and retaliation. And all these aspects, monitoring of whether or not the collusive agreement has been put into practice, figuring out who is the agent who is cheating, and then the retaliation, all this becomes easier and easier with a machine-learned AI agent working on its own. So as a result, competition authorities face significant difficulties because these pricing strategies often stem from very complex technologies and do not even have or deliberate human collusion. So I think we should, and we would be also talking about the policy implications and the enforcement challenges, whether or not agencies have the skills, how to verify these algorithms, and finally, even will it be possible to get inputs or get into the proprietary algorithms of these companies? Will they be willing to part with them? So many questions, and looking for all these answers, and some of these answers we have Christian Bergqvist with us this afternoon. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure being allowed to present some recent thinking in particular to other stakeholders. One of the things I personally think is extremely fascinating about tech is that I'm old enough to remember where we didn't really talk about tech. It was not really a concern. Then suddenly it became, it will fix all problems by introducing competition to all segments. And now we're sort of moving forward to a position where we're very much afraid that tech is going to kill competition. And there are sort of two dimensions when we talk about the anti-competitive sides of AI and tech. That is, of course, the issue of market power. That is Google. And then there is the risk of collusion. And right now, everybody is looking at Google and market power. And I think, of course, there are merits to that. But I think that there is another looming issue that we need to be mindful of, which is much bigger. And that is that AI can be used and particularly abused to facilitate collusion in an anti-competitive way. And I actually think that that is a much more imminent risk, and that is what I'm going to present about today. I have a presentation, and I think that I should be able to show it if I go down here. Yeah. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Excellent.
I can.
Now, I'm a great fan of presentations, and I'm not a fan of death by PowerPoint. So I promise you, it will not be, hopefully, not a boring presentation. But there is this perception that we are looking forward to a situation where AI will facilitate collusion in a manner that we cannot do anything about. So we need to be afraid. I'm not entirely certain to which extent this concern has reached India. I understand there's actually been two cases in India. One was just simply closed, and the other one, there was no infringement. So that looks like the competition authority in India actually is mindful. But when I have talked to people in India, I have not gotten the impression that this is something that concerns people. And I actually think that that is something that you need to be mindful of. And what is interesting is that if we turn to America, we can actually see that the enforcers are very much afraid of this. This is, in case you do not know it, this is the former chair of the Federal Trade Commission, Lina Carr. She showed up on The Daily Show, and The Daily Show is a very popular and entertaining program when she spoke about AI and other issues, including the risk that computers is going to collude and coordinate prices. So that looks like that is actually an issue that are a concern and an enforcement priority, at least under the former chairman of the Federal Trade Commission. Now, it actually goes back, but it doesn't really go back that far. It goes back to approximately 2016, where a book was put out, Virtual Competition, who actually sort of, sketched some scenario where algorithm would essentially eliminate competition. The Competition and Market Authority, that is the enforcer in UK, put out a report the year after, I think. And then OECD did a report in 2017. So around 2016, 17, we got a couple of reports saying that there is a risk, but we do believe that we can actually remedy it if we are aware of the risk and if we take proactive steps. Now, subsequently, not much has actually happened. And I think that the reason why nothing really has happened is that everybody has been focusing on Google and market power, which is media-wise much more interesting. And obviously, legally, they are much more complicated. But I think that in terms of risk, AI collusion is much more imminent. And I actually think that if we think about it, there's nothing new about being afraid of technology. We got Frankenstein, which is from 1818, but it reaches back to an old Jewish legend, which goes back thousands of years. We got Boys from Brazil, and my personal favorite, the Terminator. In all of this, we can see how humans start meddling with something that normally is reserved for the god or gods. and we get punished for that because it comes back and kills us. So we could argue that there's actually nothing new about being afraid the technology will turn against us. And I don't really think that the problem of AI is real right now, at least not in Europe. But I do believe that going forward, it is a risk that we need to be mindful, and we're already seeing some of the first cases. So the question is, should we be afraid that AI is going to try to dominate the world? Well, they will probably do it on television and in books. To what extent they will do it in reality, I don't know. But we need to be mindful, and I always encourage people and forces to think about the risk. And I believe that if we are aware that there is a risk, and we can actually apply competition law if we are, if we actually think it over, I think that the risk is perhaps less imminent. Now, the reason why the reason why we know the risk is real is because we've got some cases in US, and the details are essentially that landlords has subscribed to a program called RealPage, who actually helps them optimizing the rent. And the way to do it is that they sort of exchange, well, I think they exchange information. The case is ongoing, but they probably exchange information on vacancies and other landlord charges, and that actually allows them to drive off the price. At least that is the claim of the DOJ, that is the Department of Justice, who is one of the enforcers in US. They have two, and also a lot of private plaintiff. And at the same time, we got some alleged or potential victims of casino, hotel and resorts also coordinating prices. They are also litigating these cases. So in US, we actually got some cases where we can see that AI allegedly has helped the companies to optimize prices at a higher level, and obviously that would usually be an illegal cartel. And the question is, of course, to which extent it is illegal if the computer does it. I think that is the case, but I should be open about the case is pending in US. Now, I don't know about India, but the perception in Europe is that Americans tend to be crazy, and obviously right now they are crazy on a higher level. And I think some of those cases, yeah, I love the fact that you're smiling. So it's the fact that some of these cases are ongoing is not so much a testimony to Americans be crazy and they love suing. It's more question about American antitrust is slightly different compared to European, and also, as far as I understand, Indian, because they have a much more narrow notion of an agreement. On the US antitrust, an agreement is actually something colluded between people and companies. And if you rely on a third party, it might not qualify as an agreement. And that, of course, means that if you have an AI who coordinate on your behalf, you might be able to escape the notion of agreement under American antitrust. That is at least the position of the defendant in this case. Obviously, the plaintiff have a different position. Now, if we sort of ignore the legal side and look into why is it that we should be concerned about AI, then we need to understand a couple of things about cartel. And that is, unlike what you might think, running a cartel is actually very, very complicated. They have a tendency to collapse by themselves, because even though we have agreed to something, implementing is challenging, because I have a strong incentive to cheat. Because if you commit to raising your price and I choose not to, I might be able to capture some of your customers. And we can actually see it because, the graph you can see here is actually from a real cartel called the Lucene cartel. This is from the American part, but there's also a European part. And even though they're actually committed to having a fixed price, they constantly experience collapses, and what I here refer to as first and second price war, where you can see the collapse literally, the cartel literally collapse. So even though they actually had an agreement about quotas and prices, they were not really able to implement it in full, and the cartel collapsed from time to time. Now, you don't need to take my word for it. You can check out this excellent book who actually goes through all known European and American cartels and explain not only how complicated it is operating them, but also how they tend to collapse by themselves unless you put in a ringleader. And if we turn to the Lucene cartel, we actually had not a ringleader, but we had a fake trade organization who on a regular basis set up meeting. Why do we know that? Well, that's because the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, actually infiltrated it. So they managed to install some secret cameras in the hotel rooms where they had the meetings. So they actually recorded. You can go to YouTube and Google Lucene cartel, then you can see the real take, and you can see how adult men actually speak to each other when they are in the confine of what they believe to be private. You can also do something else, because there's actually done a movie based on the Lucene cartel, The Informant. I really recommend it. It's very entertaining, and it's also pertaining to a life story. And obviously, I love when antitrust story is turned into a movie, because then I can sort of tell my students that next time we're going to talk about a movie which you have to watch. And in this case, it's not only based on a real story; it also tells the story behind how they actually managed to infiltrate it, and on top, it's actually quite entertaining. So what do you do in practice? Well, you tend to put in an enforcer. That is, once we have agreed to a cartel agreement, somebody needs to enforce it. And that can be a trade organization. It can be, if there is a gray eminence or godfather who has, a tradition of being the one who actually dictate and mandate what to do and what not to do in the business. That could be him. But it can also be a muscle man. I sort of assume that you know the movie The Godfather. The other one is from a Danish movie about a Danish cartel, where they literally had a muscle man who actually enforced it. So people who failed to respect the quotas, they got he showed up and literally got physical. Now, what can AI do? Well, AI can actually help overcoming the problem of not only implementing it, but also agreeing to something. Because just the very fact that we need to set up a meeting can be challenging. And here AI can help us by sort of, going through our calendar and find some vacancy. And subsequently, it can monitor compliance by checking that we actually respect what we have agreed. Of course, we can have physical meetings, as we saw in the Lucene cartel, but AI is much more efficient and also leaves less evidence that can be relied upon by the enforcer. So it doesn't really change anything, but it makes it much more plausible that we can avoid the cartel collapsing. And that was actually what made Lina Khan show up on popular TV, because she was concerned about AI being abused to facilitate cartel, and she wanted to make business and legislators aware of the risk and the need to be mindful. So, the enforcers in Europe has not shown up on popular TV. They have put out a paper, a set of guidelines who actually outline when company legally can cooperate. And one of the things they actually notice here is that if you choose to cooperate, which you are you have the right to do that. What you cannot do is do something that is anti-competitive, which of course is coordinating prices. And then they made people aware that if you rely on a third party or AI, it does not really change the illegal and anti-competitive nature of the cartel. So you cannot rely on AI and third party and claim that there is no cartel, because that is essentially what they have done in the US. The Commission, the European enforcer, very clearly state here that is not a way of eluding condemnation. So what can AI actually help with? Well, if we return to the book, we can actually see that running a cartel is very complicated. So AI and algorithm can help us reaching a consensus. We need to agree, And agreeing on a price can be complicated if there are many parameters. You do not have a simple price. The price is calculated against a number of parameters. The AI can help us reaching a consensus on how we fix these parameters, which would allow us to coordinate prices. It can also be complicating to run the cartel, because how do we ensure compliance? And here the AI can facilitate by doing different kind of compliance report. It can, send me an email saying that, my co-conspirators are actually compliant. They're actually respecting what we have agreed with. So here, A and B, AI can help establishing the cartel, and it can help managing the cartel. It can also do more than that, because meeting can be complicated. My calendar is always packed, and whenever my friends want to set something up, when can we actually meet? That can be complicated. The AI can help doing that, and it can also negate the need of actually meeting, because when we meet, we leave traces. Everybody has a mobile phone. Whenever that mobile phone is, that can actually be tracked. If I rely on a plane or taxi and hotel, there will be evidence suggesting that I have been there. And that is evidence that the enforcer can rely on to establish the existence of a cartel. And here, AI can help us. I don't know, does any of you use Google Calendar or Doodle when you need to set up a meeting? Yeah, I can see some of you are nodding. Because the point is that, whenever I need to meet with my friends, it's a nightmare. So what we do is quite often we use Doodle to find a vacancy in our calendar. And essentially, AI can do the same. It can actually identify opportunities to meet. And by doing that, we can avoid physical meetings, potentially avoid physical meetings, but actually reduce the risk of being caught subsequently, because there are no evidence suggesting that we have had a meeting. Now, the interesting thing is that none of these really change the nature of the cartel. And in Europe, it will legally be completely covered by the notion of agreement. Because the fact that we do not meet physical, but we task an AI to manage our calendar and reach an understanding, doesn't really change the fact that we have agreed and consented to act anti-competitive. However, it might actually be possible for AI to reach an understanding without any kind of human involvement. At least that is the perception that we get when we watch movies. We have very advanced robots who actually coordinate things without involving humans. And the question is, of course, is this actually covered by the notion of an agreement in Europe? I'm a little skeptic. In America, obviously not. I don't know about India. I would imagine that you probably follow the European approach. So what we can see is that A, B, and C doesn't really change the nature of the cartel, but D might actually do that. Now, what is interesting is that if we return to the statement made by the European Commission, they actually peddle the idea that even D would probably be covered by the notion of agreement, because, we actually cautiously deploy an algorithm, and we consciously ask the algorithm to reach an understanding with our competitor. So the fact that we do not actually have any kind of direct interaction between a human does not mean that there's not an agreement. That is the Commission's position. I'm a little skeptic on that. But it is pretty obvious that if we talk about A and B, it doesn't really change anything that we use algorithm and AI. And when it comes to C, we will probably also be covered, and D, it is a little more complicated. What I will do now is that I will try to explain the legal position when it comes to C and D in Europe. Now, we have something that we call consorted practice. And that is something that is not an agreement, but nevertheless allows us to coordinate. Normally, an agreement would be we sit down and we put something in writing, but in most European countries, it is not a condition that something is written. Also, an oral agreement, and even what you would call a gentleman agreement would be covered by the notion of consorted practice. So there's something that allows you to coordinate without having put it into a formal agreement. We even have a situation where they sort of delegated to third party to reach a consensus, and the European Court of Justice confirmed that was also covered by the notion of consorted practice. So we actually have a legal position in Europe, but even if you do not establish something we normally would accept as an agreement, but nevertheless allows us to coordinate, and even a situation where you sort of task third party, you mandate them to act on our behalf, that would be perfectly within the reach of a notion of agreement under competition law, and thereby establish a cartel. So when it comes to the first part, the European Commission is in safe water. Now, what is interesting is that they actually take it a notch up, because they claim that even unilateral disclosure, that is, I participate in a meeting, and then I kind of declare, because I might be the chair, or I might be invited to do a presentation, and then I sort of say, I think that the ideal price should be, and I think that everybody should raise the price. If I'm conscious of my competitor being in that room, the Commission's position is that would actually establish an agreement under antitrust. So even unilateral statement, that is that I, on television at a fair or an event disclose what I think we should do, that would be sufficient to establish agreement. I think that this is an overreach, because historically the judiciary has been unwilling to accommodate unilateral statement under the notion of an agreement in Europe. Obviously, if I am the chair of an event where all my competitors are present, and then I make a statement, it would be challenging for me to rebut that I did that knowing that my competitors was there. But if I communicate with my customers, I'm running a gas station, and I made an announcement regarding the price. I put in an advertisement in the newspaper, say that I will raise my price next week. That is perfectly legitimate. That has been mandated by the Court of Justice. So when the Commission says that even unilateral statement would be covered, I think that they are not faithfully disclosing what has been accepted in case law. So when it comes to C, when we sort of task AI to facilitate collusion, I think that in most situations, yes, that would fall within the reach of competition law and agreement in European law, probably also in US, even though they have a more narrow reading of a notion of an agreement. But there are probably a situation under C that might be in the gray area. And of course, what happens when there are absolutely no human involvement? If we go to US, I'm not really qualified to offer opinions about the legal position in US. But as far as I understand the rent case, the landlord cases, they have essentially delegated to third party to calculate an optimal price. So I think that this would definitely be covered by the notion of agreement in Europe, and probably also in US. So the real question is, what happens when there are no human involvement, when the AI becomes so advanced that it can make autonomous decisions? Now, first of all, we need to understand that just because you notice parallel behavior, it does not mean that there is an agreement. In case you do not know it, there's actually a perfect correlation between the number of movies where Nicolas Cage is in and the number of people who drown in a swimming pool in US. but I am utterly convinced that there's absolutely no connection between these two facts. So just because you see something happens parallel, companies raise the price, it does not mean that there is an underlying agreement. But obviously, you might be suspicious. And the reality is that companies operating in sectors, oligopolistic sectors, where it is highly likely that there is a high level of transparency. So whatever you do, your competitor also see it, and they might actually intelligently adapt their posture in accordance with that. They need to be mindful that even though parallel behavior does not prove an underlying agreement, that is at least an inflated risk that the competition authority is going to be suspicious of that. Sorry. So we got a couple of old cases already mentioned the sugar. We got another one, Alstom, who specifically said that just because you see unilateral price announcement, you cannot infer an agreement from that if there are other plausible explanation. And in that specific case, that was that the market was very transparent, and it was essentially a tight oligopoly. So whatever one did, the other one was plausible to take into consideration. So we have a situation where you do actually have a right to adopt an intelligent posture to whatever the competitors is doing. And if you take an algorithm, you develop an algorithm you use to monitor the market. I'm not qualified to do that, but I know some people who are good at computer. They say that they can actually task an algorithm to trawl through the internet and check out whatever certain companies do. And I also, we call that data harvesting. And you can do that. That's relatively simple. And if company does that, that would be unilateral. And I'm slightly, I actually believe that they have the right to do that. And I do not think that that would fall within the notion of an agreement. So I actually think that in some aspect, the European Commission's position is correct, but in other, it is not. I don't think that if you have general unilateral action and announcement, I actually think that that would not be covered by the notion of agreement in Europe. So that also means that there is actually a gray area where algorithm can be deployed, provided that you do it unilateral, that cannot be remedied and reached under competition law. Now, I have what I consider an excellent paper about that. And actually, it's actually perfect timing that I'm allowed to present some highlight from it, because it's just been nominated for an award. I don't know if I will get it, but Google it and vote for it. Then I might actually get the award for the best academic paper. It is published here. You can Google. It's also available online. Here I have cited references to the cases that I have cited. And feel free to email me with questions subsequently. I'm also very interested to hear about antitrust cases in India, because I really develop a high level of respect for the competition authority in India. They actually do excellent decisions. That was my presentation. I'll stop sharing. There you go.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. And you kept your word. So no deaths by slides. Really interesting, humorous, and very apt slides for the topic. Yeah, so I did see some parallels between, of course, AI just accentuates the problem. But when we were looking at algorithmic collusion in the absence of AI, also some certain same legal questions arose. That is the question of liability. So whether a software programmer can be made liable for something which it is doing to allow concerted practice between, say, two individual firms. Then the question also which comes about a definition of an agreement. Indian competition law to be covers understanding, and will this understanding even so? The question which was coming to my mind, which I will, which you can answer later after the discussants have spoken, is that even if it is done by autonomous agents, once the outcomes are clear that these autonomous agents are leading to price manipulation, will it not be the onus of these companies or of these entities to actually go and either alter their algorithms or stop using those kinds of algorithms? Because once it is known that this is leading to certain concerted price efforts. So that's one. And this second, of course, is whether or not the prioritization question which you raised at the beginning of your talk is, should competition authorities now be investing far more resources in at least equipping themselves to be dealing with this issue, be it in the form of some technological heft, the ability to understand, ability of data scientists and of other non-economists, non-lawyers to be able to hack algorithms, and the possibility of looking at collusive behavior. So these are very interesting questions, and many questions which you have raised. But before we get into an open Q&A, I should have introduced two very bright people from India who are here to discuss post what you have just presented. We have Parthsarathi. He is a partner in the Competition Law and Policy and International Trade and Customs. Thanks, Partha, at ELP, Economic Law Practice. And he has worked on matters primarily focused on trade remedy investigations, mergers and acquisitions. And from academia, we have Professor Dr. Shilpi Bhattacharya. She is a professor of law at Jindal Law Global School, OP Jindal Global University, India. She is teaching competition law and keeps continuous and very academic tabs on what the competition authority is doing. She received her PhD in competition law from Erasmus University, Rotterdam. So if I could request Shilpi, if you could come in with some comments, questions, what came to your mind. The capacity issue keeps on coming to my mind again and again, because this would really require competition authorities to ramp up their capabilities in dealing with these new age competition problems. Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Mr. Malik, and also thank you for that excellent presentation, Professor Bergqvist. So I agree with what both of you said. I think all these issues are absolutely relevant and need to be addressed. And the paper, it was really a very interesting paper to read, because also sort of presents the two frameworks for AI collusion in a very clear and succinct way. And I think this is definitely an issue that needs to be taken much more seriously than we are doing, as both of you have said. So from an Indian perspective, firstly, just from the market perspective, I think that this is particularly a serious issue because we see a lot of duopolies in digital markets, where there are essentially two players in a number of markets. Like in India, we have food or aggregators where we have essentially Zomato, Swiggy. Then we have earlier the ride aggregators were essentially Uber, Ola and Uber. Now there are more. But in these markets where there are duopolies and there's so many of them, collusion is really easy. And when you're pricing algorithmically, I think that can happen very naturally in these kind of markets. So I think we just, given the market structures in digital markets, I think collusion is going to be very much incentivized, and we need to look at it much more seriously. I don't know why we're not doing it. And we do see this kind of, given that these are platform markets, even on the other side of the market, right? We see that, for instance, on the business user side of the market, a lot of like platforms charge the same commissions to hotels or to sellers on the platforms or to app developers, whichever market you're looking at. And that's also a kind of collusion if you're charging exactly the same commission. There's no competition on that. So that's the same price that you're charging on the other side of the market. So this is very much a real concern. And I think from that perspective, competition authorities should be looking into it from both the sides, or all the sides of the pricing on all the sides of the market. And I mean, it's also a real concern for consumers because essentially we are being prices are not sort of that transparent. And in India, given sort of the nature of the market, we're more used to these kind of market structures where we can negotiate with sellers in the market, etc. And that was kind of like the whole basis for the one of the two cases that Professor Bergqvist referred to in the Indian context, which was the Sameer Agarwal case, where Sameer Agarwal was basically saying that through the algorithm that Ola or Uber kind of has for pricing for ride aggregators, the whole ability that consumers have to negotiate has gone. And that, I think, in the Indian market is just so central to the Indian sort of consumer thing to be able to negotiate. And because in this digital kind of space, consumers don't have those opportunities anymore. And that is, I think, a loss for consumers, and also very much sort of something that is very uniquely Indian, that you want to go and you want to bargain, and that's the joy of buying things. So just that's on the business side. On the legal side, and I'm sure Mr. Jha is much more sort of better equipped to talk about this. But on the legal side, I would say that the CCI has looked into this, but I think it was at a time when things were very different. Sameer Agarwal case is 2018. And I think at that time also, when the CLRC, the Competition Law Review Committee report came out, and they looked into algorithmic collusion, and they said that right now, sort of the D option that Professor Bergqvist was talking about, I think they looked into that as well, and they said right now we have to wait and watch and see what other people are doing, because no one is really taking action on this front. And so they didn't really do anything at that time. But I think now the time has come to really see sort of how pricing is happening in these markets, and are prices going up? Because also the thing is that prices are so dynamic in these markets that collusion, the nature of collusion will be a bit different. So I think when it comes to sort of AI-driven pricing models and AI-driven collusion, we also have to maybe have, just putting it out there, but maybe have an entirely, like a slightly different, like a regulatory framework to deal with it, because of dynamic pricing, because of the lack of transparency, because of the algorithmic black box, because of machine learning, and all the things that all of you have talked about. It's very different from collusion that, in my mind, from collusion that we see in other physical offline markets. So I think the challenges are different. And I think we don't want to water down the law for every kind of collusion. So it might make sense to have a different set of regulations that can actually deal with machine learning related collusion, and apply that specifically to those kind of pricing practices. Because the prices could be fluctuating, and Professor Bergqvist also showed us that graph where even in the lysine cartel, sort of the cartel did break down. It can break down. But that doesn't mean that there's no collusion happening. So we need to kind of study how pricing is happening in these markets, what is the way in which collusion is occurring, and sort of essentially consumers being deprived of the benefit of price competition, how that is happening. And then sort of design regulatory frameworks, in my mind, that might be separately for that. I think in the Sameer Agarwal case, the CCI at that time had a more limited understanding of algorithmic collusion. And I think now that requires kind of an update, because at that time and that was specifically in the context of hub and spoke models, which are also kind of significant to the way that algorithmic collusion occurs. Use of price parity clauses can facilitate collusion in AI-driven markets. And the CCI has dealt with price parity clauses now through the Make My Trip case as well. But I think that in the Samir Agarwal case, the CCI made this note that the case was brought with respect to collusion between drivers on Ola or Uber's network, but it should have been maybe a case of collusion between Ola and Uber rather than saying that the drivers were colluding. So I think the nature of the case should have been a bit different. And then maybe that case would have had a different outcome. But I think that the nature of algorithmic collusion that the CCI kind of interpreted in the Samir Agarwal case, that there must be evidence of an agreement between drivers that they are knowingly entering into this agreement. That kind of suggests that we still need to have some kind of intentionality to be evident, and pure machine learning may not be sufficient. So sort of just letting the algorithm kind of do its stuff and that leading to collusion, the D element that Professor Bergqvist talked about, I don't think that would be punishable under Indian law. I don't think the CCI would, in my view, just given the Samir Agarwal case, take that to be collusion. But like I said, that probably we need to have a separate set of regulations to deal with this particular kind of pricing framework and method of collusion.
So, Shilpi, you brought out that case very well. But I think in the case which you are referring to, I think their algorithmic pricing itself was, as per the informant, collusive. So the informant was questioning prices being set through an algorithm, and therefore did not even get into, and therefore it was a illegal pitfall because did not even get into an agreement and understanding, etc., etc. So now I request Parth, just help us clarify the legal position. How will this kind of a machine learning algorithm, will it then fit in the agreement definition? And again, we are back to the liability question, because can then firms be made liable if something is done by autonomous machine learning algorithms and they have no say in the setting of the prices?
Thank you, Payal ma'am, and thank you, Professor Berg, for giving this presentation, which, of course, as Payal ma'am said, is very timely, given that what we're seeing in the AI market already. And thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, as well, for your inputs. So I'll try and answer Payal ma'am's question. And I think she made a point in her initial intervention about what if, in all cases of AI algorithm or so-called algorithm collusion, if there is a price which is similar, authority will first see the outcome in the market, and after it has seen the outcome in the market, will start investigation into that why it is happening, the point which Payal ma'am made at the beginning. And I think I was going to come to the point, but first let me address the legal question on how the Indian law is placed on this issue. And there I have a slight, different view than what Professor Bhattacharya said. So the way agreement is defined in Indian context, I am particularly trying to address the basket 3 and basket 4 of your paper. I think both 3 and 4 are heavily nuanced. And I think 4 is much more nuanced than 3. So let's take the hardest case about 4, where there is perhaps no human involvement, and if there is a collusion, so to say, or tacit collusion, so to say, in firm conduct. Is Indian law currently equipped enough legally to deal with that? And the way the concept of agreement has been interpreted under Indian law, it's very, very wide. Not only definitionally, it's wide in terms of legislative provision, and it includes action in concert in its definition. The way CCI has interpreted it and subsequently affirmed by appellate courts is that it's extremely wide definition, and you can include anything in this. Number two is where I want to invest a little more time is that quality of evidence and burden of proof. And again, on quality of evidence, CCI has gone to, I would say, there have been cases where the threshold which it applies to conclude that there could be an agreement in this case. There are examples where the threshold has been very low. So, for example, there is a tire cartel case. Of course, that case was remanded by NCLAT, but not on this legal standard, on something very else, factual issue, and that is an appeal before Supreme Court. But in the tire cartel case, there was some degree of parallelism as far as CCI's calculations were concerned, which were challenged. All tire manufacturers increased their prices in very close ranges. The correlation coefficient was very high. But CCI said that this price parallelism read with essentially that the market is a oligopoly market and players have a stable market, and absent any plausible explanation for higher EBITDA, it concluded that there has to be an agreement, so to say, as has been prohibited under Section 3. So the way CCI has applied the threshold on evidence is essentially to say that if you don't have a plausible explanation on a parallel conduct or price parallelism, if it is not commercially justifiable, adverse inference would be drawn with respect to existence of an agreement, agreement as it has been understood in the Competition Act. And to that extent, I think even basket 4, to my mind, I don't see, and there's where I have slight difference if I have understood Professor Bhattacharya's comment, is that I think law legally is capable enough to include, it can be really widely interpreted to include circumstances of collusion without human involvement. Of course, when it comes to burden of proof under Indian context, it is up to the CCI first to demonstrate that there is an agreement, because the way they define it. The burden shifts to the defending parties in terms of offering an explanation that why pricing, let's say pricing is identical or similar. They need to give a plausible justification that what are the rational justifications which can demonstrate that this similarity is not a product of tacit collusion or any sort of let's say coordination, but it has been arrived independently. That burden then shifts to them. But first CCI has to demonstrate that, and then they need to the burden shifts to them, and they need to demonstrate that it doesn't exist. So again, I talked about these things because I think the way law is currently worded, in my view, it is possible to do. I give you example of tire cartel case, and there are other examples on algorithmic collusion. Of course, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, Professor Berg, that there are 2 cases at least on airline algorithmic collusion where the CCI dealt with this issue. But in these cases, of course, CCI came to a conclusion. In one case, it was the fact that there was no uniformity in price. Factors such as they were not using same common software or algorithmic software in this case, all of that weighed in favor of finding that there was no correlation. But algorithmic collusion is something which they're looking at it. Also, of course, as everybody in this group knows, that CCI has already initiated a market study, so I'm sure they're looking at the intersection of AI and competition risk in a very holistic way, including the instances which you have tried to explain in this paper. They're looking at that. My second element is with respect to before I go on the liability point, I think I agree. If there is, and that's where I wanted to agree with Payal ma'am, is that where there is a outcome in the market which raises a suspicion, the natural question for a competition authority then is to investigate that why is this price similar, right? And if you don't have a sufficient explanation, even assuming you are talking about basket 4, where there is no human involvement, the questions will then raise that, okay, what are the AI models which you are working on? Now, what kind of inputs have been provided to this model? How it has been programmed? And I'll come to the complexity of that. That's my second part of my my speech today. But assuming for a moment that all of this is doable, and if it is shown that the inputs which have been provided or factors which have been provided or guided the programming of the AI, and they are independent and there is nothing illegal about that, I don't think there is any case to make under competition law. But if the manner in which AI has been programmed, so to say that some factors which have been, let's say, at least provided to the algorithm in this case, or AI, which is not consonant or conformity with the competition laws, then liability will be on the companies who are driving it. So whether it is through a third party, whether it is directly by the company, all of that which you have already covered. I think again, Indian law is very, very, well equipped as it stands today, that it can pin down a liability. Whether you want to put it on a third person, then it becomes a hub and spoke model, which is very much covered here. Otherwise, if it is directly done by company, it is covered. So that's on that point. Now coming to the second part, which is, so I wanted to say first that legally it is possible. Then comes the technical challenge, which I think both Professor Bhattacharya and Payal mentioned. And I think CCI also needs to be equipped enough in terms of technical skills to uncover this. Now, what kind of tools will be required to uncover a situation like basket 4, which you have explained? It's very complex, and I'm not a technical expert. There are OECD papers which say that what kind of audits you can do, audits where you don't have full access to algorithmic data, audits where you can have access to algorithmic data, and in all possibilities there are challenges. And I think CCI will need to really work on this, that they will have to have really right set of skilled person with vertical experience in these sectors, how AI is programmed, etc. Including they would need technical capabilities, software, and all to uncover this. One important element which comes is that when you are talking about investigating algorithms where investigation will be very intrusive, the question of confidentiality comes. And this, why I raise this is that unfortunately there has been a trend where much of the information, and in many cases information, has been released to the media, or media has been able to get the information in some or other manner. And that is going to be a huge concern, because when you're talking about algorithms and all, of course, this is very, very proprietary knowledge. I mean, you can say in one way that for many companies, I mean, for AI companies, this is their entire asset. And if an investigation is done on those aspects, and if the expectation from CCI would be that full scale disclosure is made by investigating parties, then it means that they really need to work a lot on confidentiality protections at their end as well. So these were my few initial thoughts on this paper on this. And one last point which I just wanted to make is that I think at some level, competition authorities will also have to develop or align on. I think to that extent, I would agree with Professor Bhattacharya, is that when we are talking about programming of these AIs, and I'm particularly talking in context of, again, basket 4, where we are saying there is no human involvement, what kind of inputs which you provide to an AI or to a program which you think is legal and what is not legal. And to that extent, I think some level of identification needs to be done by competition authorities, so that it is clear upfront that this is what you can't do in programming and this is what you can do in programming. So I'll pause there, and happy to take any reactions to this.
So, Bergqvist, do you have any comments or to what the discussants and Shilpi and Parth have
yes,
said?
when I don't like giving advice to other countries, but when it comes to India, I actually think there's two dimensions, and we already touched upon it. Is AI collusion something that should be a priority for ICC? And to be honest, I don't think so. I think the main concern should be traditional cartels, probably local, because India is such a huge country. So there's a lot of area where some shady things goes on, and I think that should be the main priority. But if I understand it correctly, and that will also be my guess, there are already companies in India who are contemplating or are relying on AI. And I think it would probably be, big retail chains And in order to avoid, of course, they can also do anti-competitive things, also to avoid being, accused of only going after small local fish. They should definitely investigate them, and if nothing else, at least put out a paper saying that this is an issue. But there's also something else, and that is the second dimension. That is, if you are a lawyer, because when I was in private practice, my experience was you essentially have three kinds of clients. You have those who are very guilty and already broken the law, and they need you to defend them. Then you have those clients who want to be compliant and then need to know what can you actually do, what is actually legal and what is illegal. That's also what I took for the presentation here. And finally, you got some clients who are victims of cartels, and they need to know if you can actually sue the perpetrator. And that means that while AI collusion might not be a top priority, in my opinion, for ICC, it should definitely be something that the lawyers are mindful of, because you might have clients who want to know if they can do this and to what extent they can do it. And you might have clients who feel that they are victims. So this is definitely something that the lawyers need to be mindful. That's also a reason why I think it was very smart to include a lawyer in the panel here today.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So this one thing which came to my mind listening to this conversation was there are many low-hanging fruits, and there are so many obvious cartels which then do not get detected because of lack of evidence. This tacit collusion is rampant, and the reason, and India is a little peculiar. I remember from my early days at the Competition Commission of India, we knew that the onion sector is cartelized, but there was no way, there were no phone calls, there were no evidence available, because the tacit collusion was so rampant, because these farmers or intermediaries are connected with each other through social networks. You go up the ladder into the very, very high corporate sector also. They are connected with each other through kin or through marriage or other relationships. So there would be no meetings, there are no smoking gun evidence. And so those cartels are difficult to prosecute. So we just wonder now, how would cartels which are intervened by automated machine learning, AI tools be prosecuted in the absence of smoking gun evidence? My only, I'm all with Parth when he said that CCI has taken a very low threshold for inferring an agreement, and that's precisely because the but for is so obvious that but for an agreement you could not have come. So we look, the commission is looking at the outcomes and inferring an agreement and inferring a cartel and liabilities on the parties. In relation to AI, I think there would have to be also more, just taking a cue from what Shilpi said, responsibilities or burden or onus shifted to the firms, that once they know how AI has been programmed and the training data sets are known to them, if they are known to them, and if the outcomes are very obviously concerted action outcomes, then they have to do something relating to the some kind of a self-regulation of, though it's an oxymoron, to at least correct those AI tools or put something else in place. So I would just also, I think there were a few questions which I think one of my team member, or two of them had for you. Nikita, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for such a great presentation. It was very insightful, definitely. So just one question, being a part of CCI earlier in the last, in 2023, so there were discussions when being in CCI about the approaches that should be taken. So as Professor Shilpi has already mentioned, that many of these India's digital markets are concentrated. So as she has given the example for like the food delivery or ride aggregators, all these are very concentrated. So these platforms increasingly rely on these AI-driven pricing models only, which might lead to some conscious parallelism also without any explicit agreement with it. So given these limitations for the existing cartel enforcement tools under the Competition Act, which is currently available, should India adopt a facts-based approach to tackle this AI-driven collusion? I just want to have some ideas from any one of you where you can comment specifically the Professor Christian, if you could tell anything about whether India should adopt a facts-based approach to handle these new AI-driven collusion, which will come up now. Thank you.
So Bhargavi, you can just ask your question and then I'll request Professor Bergqvist to answer. Yeah.
Thank you for your interesting presentation, Professor Bergqvist. I just have one question, and it's open to the entire panel. What kind of collusion risks do you anticipate emerging in cloud marketplaces where independent software developers sell their AI applications and other SaaS products? And I'm asking this especially because there are now these cloud marketplaces are also now introducing AI-based summarization and comparison tools that perform summarization and comparison based on various parameters like customer reviews and features, product features, and all of that. So one risk that came to my mind was self-preferencing, but do you anticipate any collusion risks as well? And how should regulators deal with that? Thank you.
Yeah, so anyone to answer these questions? So Professor Bergqvist, do you have any thoughts?
I don't like giving advice to other countries. India is an extremely fascinating country because some of the decision coming out of CCI is really, really advanced, and I would not have expected them. But India is also the biggest country in the world. That means that there are a lot of areas where a lot of stuff goes on. So you can have a lot of good laws and good enforcement in New Delhi that people in rural areas don't really care about. When it comes to cloud, I think that is actually where you might see collusion because if we sort of rely on the same algorithm to help us and share stuff, it might be possible to promote collusion. But my perception is that this is more a question about market power, and self-preferring is an expression of market power. It is probably one of the most complicated and as far as I understand that all the cases CCI has done, they have actually not condemned self-favoring. They have vindicated Google on self-preferring charges. And it's actually the same in US and in Europe. It is other things that they have done that have been convicted of. So once you need what you need to understand is once you start tackling with these companies, you're gonna be locked up for the next 10 years. So you should only do that if you have really strong resources and you really want to take on the most complicated cases that you can find. So my initial feeling would be to be cautious on doing cases pertaining to cloud. That does not mean that you cannot do reports and papers identifying issues, but opening actual cases is a little more dangerous. But I think there is a risk of market power. If you are the one who owns the cloud, you can use that to leverage. And I think that Microsoft is doing that in Europe and US, and I would be surprised if they're not doing the same in India. When it comes to effect and prioritizing, it's very much a question about how much resource you want to put into a case. If you have a simple cartel that is obviously illegal, and I think that should be the priority to pursue them. Once you have these AI-induced cartels where it is not obvious that there is an agreement, and it is not obvious that it is anti-competitive because it can also promote competition. You essentially committing yourself to invest a lot of resources into doing these cases. And that is something that the enforcers need to be mindful of, because whenever they go after one issue, there are other issues that they cannot go after. And that is a thing that we often tend to forget. So even though I don't like making advice, if I should do one single advice, is that yes, you can do in principle all kind of cases, but you need to make priorities, and you need to make priorities terms of based on what has impact, and most impact, that is traditional cartels, and then of course AI collusion, and to some extent market power. So even though I do not want to make recommendation, that would be my recommendation. And of course you need more resource, and you need more conferences like this where we can sort of share observation and concerns.
Yeah, thank you so much. So many, is someone raising? Yeah, Parth, please.
No, if the scheduled time is over, I would.
No. We are good for another 5 minutes. Yeah.
So I just wanted to respond to Nikita's question quickly, and I think where I'm coming from, I think already I think Professor Berg has also made that comment. I think there are many low-hanging fruits when it comes to cartelization in India on which the regulator should focus. There are many other concentrated markets than this digital markets. Of course, digital markets by very nature, some of the examples which you gave, whether it is ride cab aggregator platforms, or whether it is food aggregator platforms, they are likely to be concentrated. You won't see a situation where you have 50 different cab aggregators or 50 different food aggregators. It doesn't work. It will always be a smaller market. And to that extent, if there is a price parallelism whether it comes to platform fee and all, I think CCI should definitely investigate that. No questions about that. If they find that these platform fees are, identical without any plausible explanation, surely they should, investigate that. But it's also equally possible that you simply respond to a market, right? And if you see that if competitor is able to charge 10 rupees as platform fee, why should I be charging 7? And let me also put 10 and let's see what happens. And I think that is not what is prohibited under competition law. So definitely they should see that. But equally, and I'm not saying that they are mutually exclusive, I mean, CCI can focus on digital sector, but CCI should also focus on traditional sector. And why I'm saying is that if you just look at previous years, and previous to previous year was an odd year because commission was not fully functioning for almost 7-8 months. You did not have quorum. But if you just look at the previous year, I mean, it has been a year of very low enforcement. I mean, there are only 8 investigations which have been initiated, right? And that includes even, I'm saying, after cartel cases, because nowadays CCI publishes statement on cartel cases as well. And why should that be the case? If concentration is a problem, if that is the defined problem, that concentration is a problem, then it's a problem not only for digital markets, it should be a problem for other markets as well. And, there are many good papers, whether it is from Bhattacharya, whether it is from Simon Commander and all. I mean, market concentration in India, particularly in the hands of few top, industries, is then an issue. CCI should be looking at all of that. So my suggestion then would be that not only digital markets, if concentration is what you are concerned of, then I think there is a lot which CCI can do, particularly in the Indian context and Indian economy.
Yeah, thanks. So what you've mentioned Simon Commander's paper and Bhattacharya's paper. So we did look at those also. So I didn't, though this session is not about that. Concentration can be endogenous to a market in the sense that only very few players can coexist and be profitable. And so it's scale economies, etc. But I think a greater problem is that oligopoly markets in India are probably giving rise to more concerted action. So it's the coordinated effects rather than the concentration per se, which may be a problem. And so therefore, cartels should be looked into far more than they are. So absolutely. A greater emphasis should be on cartels. And means there are many obvious cartels, and it's cartelization maybe even rampant. And so what I think Parth is saying, and what even Professor Bergqvist is saying, that given scarce resources of an authority, perhaps the traditional cartels, the traditional agreements need to be given much more importance, and concentration or AOD cases, which are hard and may have not so much of an impact on the economy as much as a well-examined, investigated, evidenced cartel case would have a far reacher, a broader effect on the economy than a abuse of dominance case. I am also in. I also believe that. I just wanted to end with one, because I still haven't spoken to a technologist, that when we started looking at these algorithms, etc., and self-preferencing issues, we were told by technology firms, no, it's the algorithm, it is not us. Then, of course, we learned that algorithms are what companies feed into the algorithms. The parameters matter, and if you feed certain parameters, you can reverse engineer an outcome. I was just wondering that can't there be, and this is just a thought which we can ask some technologists, can't the algorithm or the AI tool train the AI tool in a manner such that it hardcores the tool to avoid situations that can lead to a collusive outcome? So if there are, I'm now talking about progressive firms, why can't progressive firms do that in able to feed in the parameters such that no, you need, collusion is not one of the things which is expected out of as an outcome of this algorithm running. So just a thought, and it may not be even technologically possible, I don't know. So thank you, Professor Bergqvist. Thank you, Parth. Thank you, Shilpi. And thank you all those who have joined. I've seen many people who had joined earlier, who have dropped off now. Thanks a lot. Had a wonderful afternoon.